It's finally time. That chapter. The one everyone's been waiting for since we began this journey through the Dead Rising franchise. There's a lot of ground to cover, believe me, but this is the one that you guys have been itching for, and not covering it would be a sin. It'd be like going to a Rolling Stones concert and not hearing Sympathy for the Devil or Paint It Black. It just wouldn't be right to ignore this one, even if I really, really want to.
Congratulations on the mess you made of things. I'm trying to reconstruct the air and all that brings. And oxidation is the compromise you own. But this is beginning to feel like the dog wants a bone. Say,
just hear me out.
You said we were gonna go play mini golf.
This is beginning to feel like the long-winded blues of the never. This is beginning to feel like it's curling up slowly and finding a throat to choke. This is beginning to feel like the long-winded blues of the never. Barely controlled locomotive consuming the picture and blowing the crows to smoke. This is beginning to feel like the long-winded blues of the never. Static explosion devoted to crushing the broken and shoving the souls to ghosts. Eternalized, objectified, you set your sights so high. But this is beginning to feel like the boat busting loose from the lever.
What? What the fuck?
This is beginning to feel like the dawn of the loser forever. This is beginning to feel like the dawn of the loser forever.
Dead Rising 4. Alright, where to fucking start? So, Dead Rising 4 is the fourth mainline title in the Dead Rising series, which by this point, you already know what that is. And yeah, it had become a pretty serious franchise. With comic books, movies, spin-off games, Dead Rising was essentially the Pepsi to Resident Evil's Coke. And Capcom was especially happy since they own both. And even with Dead Rising 3's more lukewarm reception, the love and loyalty to Dead Rising by fans was still strong. Even as we officially crossed the line over into the next gen, and zombie games were considered more cliche and exhausting than ever before, with franchises like Walking Dead outstaying their welcome, Last of Us being cited as inspiration by a few too many franchises, which by the way, this is foreshadowing, and audiences becoming more interested in just something different. Not to say that zombie games were dying, there quite literally has never been a point of gaming history where zombies haven't made money. It's just that mainstream enthusiasm for zombies was not as vocal, but this is only a small part of the story. Even if the mainstream crowd absolutely never wanted to see a zombie again, fans of Dead Rising would always be happy to see a new game. Dead Rising 3 is a good little ending for the timeline that could either be expanded upon for a sequel, or it could cover the large gap of time they put in place for a prequel. There's still a lot you could do with this, even if the franchise was inching a tad too close to accessibility, watering down elements like the survivors or the timer, on top of just all around making the game too easy and trying to be more of an open world zombie game than Dead Rising. Still, maybe they could fix things with a fourth game that could be the shakeup that they actually need. You know, kind of iron out some of the edges that 3 had. Capcom had a good track record with 4s. Devil May Cry 4 kicked ass, Resident Evil 4 is legendary, maybe Dead Rising would have the same luck. Alright, let's get into it. Context. The year was officially 2016, a full 10 years since the franchise began, and 3 years since Dead Rising 3 made itself known. Dying Light was just a year previous. Remember this detail, but the average Joe has no idea what's been going on for behind the scenes. All they know is they woke up to see a new reveal trailer. The trailer is a decent little cinematic showing a faceless character walking through a ruined street with a bat that kind of looks like Negan's from Walking Dead. He checks his phone and you see it's Frank West? Holy shit, Frank is coming back in a new Dead Rising game. And is that Willamette, Colorado? Holy fuck, the new game looks awesome. A new mainline Dead Rising thing with Frank as the protagonist back in the place that started it all, and for a while that's all anybody knew. Regardless, it was hype to see. The reveal trailer was really well done. Some people weren't big on the Christmas aesthetic since everything about the game and the marketing was drenched in Christmas, but personally I was cool with it. It would help sets look apart from the other games, and at the time it was easy to assume that that would be the angle of the social commentary. Holiday shoppers. Maybe some jabs at how Christmas has been warped from a time about connecting with family into just consumerist hellscapes, with people nowadays even admitting they dread the time of year because they don't want to talk with loved ones and they take gifts for granted, which is the exact opposite of what you're supposed to be doing with Christmas. There's a lot you can do mixing zombies and Christmas, and the apocalypse did it. I'm just not realizing I reference that movie a lot lately. Maybe that should get a video. It's pretty good. Back on point, Christmas and horror are not incompatible. In fact, it's a pretty common trope that's been used a lot. Terrifier 3 takes place around Christmas. You have Krampus, Silent Night, Deadly Night, Black Christmas. The contrast of the happiest time of year with blood-soaked terror is a pretty easy thing to mix together and make something fun, especially with a franchise like Dead Rising, which has always had a lot of goofy and dark humor combined with legitimately disturbing elements. Plus, you can't leave out a shopping mall out of a commentary on holiday consumerism. I mean, it's right there. And if you're gonna bring back Frank, why not make that mall Willamette? There's so much here that's coming together right. There's no possible way this game could suck, especially since it would be made specifically for next-gen consoles, and developers have had enough time to tinker around with it to make the most out of the technology. Hell yeah, everything's coming up Millhouse. What do you mean it's the worst game in the franchise? What do you mean it killed the studio? Yeah, Dead Rising 4 didn't just fail, it was such a spectacular failure, it was the direct event that caused the closure of Blue Castle Studios, which by that time was bought up by Capcom and turned into Capcom Vancouver. They screwed up so royally, Capcom fired everybody and shut the whole thing down, moving on to focus fully on the JP side development. It was just one bad game, what the hell happened? Well, you see, with the benefit of hindsight, we have more context. Since fans were so baffled about how the game turned out, people decided to dig and find out what was going on behind the scenes, and the truth is legitimately painful. Dead Rising 4 was doomed from the very beginning. Even before we got that reveal trailer, there was no possible way this game could have turned out okay. The version we got was legitimately the best the dev team could have done considering the circumstances. There's videos out there you can watch that lay things out in more depth. I recommend the What Happened episode by Matt McMuscles and the Did You Know Gaming episode about Capcom Vancouver, which all talk about Dead Rising 4's development in pretty good detail. Here's an abridged timeline for the sake of context. Dead Rising 3's development was rockier than we originally thought. Remember how I said there were systems in 3 that felt half-finished or not added in properly? Yeah, because they kinda were. Capcom Vancouver struggled to get the game running on last-gen systems, because they wanted that to be a farewell to that era as the new generation was coming. But the scale of what they wanted to do just refused to work properly. They simply shot too close to the sun too early. Well, since they were running into problems, Microsoft themselves stepped in to offer a deal. Capcom will receive an exclusivity deal with Microsoft to develop DR3 for the new Xbox console. In return, they received more resources for the game. That's why the game was only available on Xbox One for a long time. At the time, the deal worked out in their favor. Dead Rising 3 did pretty well and the franchise was still alive. But Capcom Vancouver at this point had developed a few too many Dead Rising games. DR2, Off the Record, DR3, technically Case Zero and Case West. They were in the early stages to work on a prequel focusing on Chuck and Katie in Mexico, but that one we're going to talk about later. Capcom Vancouver was simply sick of doing the same thing over and over again. An understandable problem since whenever Vancouver wanted to pitch a different project to Capcom Japan, they were rejected, essentially being relegated to just the Dead Rising studio. They were typecasted as developers and wanted to break out of that in any way they could. This is where Microsoft does some shit that's actually pretty shady. You see, a big aspect of Capcom Vancouver's story is that Japan pretty much left them alone. They won enough clout that Capcom proper would trust them, and the main studio was simply more focused on their Japanese studios. Vancouver could do pretty much whatever they wanted with only a few check-ins a year. It's why Vancouver had enough time to make various pitches and even vertical slices to games they wanted to make, which would end up getting rejected. It was just kind of their thing. Now think about this. Vancouver was given little overhead by Capcom proper. They were desperate to break out of the Dead Rising mines, and they just signed a deal with Microsoft for exclusivity on the Xbox One. This all doesn't sound too bad in a vacuum. Well, now throw in The fucking Last of Us. Yeah, that's not a joke. Remember, Dead Rising 3 came out in 2013, specifically November 2013. The first Last of Us game came out in June 2013, a few months shy. And despite DR3 being on a substantially more powerful console, Last of Us was the game that took the world by storm. Sony was the winner for that year, and Microsoft was pissed. They wanted their equivalent to The Last of Us, so they looked at Blue Castle and pretty much went, make it like that.
In the months leading up to these talks, Microsoft had been searching to add an exclusive survival game to their portfolio in order to compete with Sony's 2013 critical darling The Last of Us. Sources from Capcom Vancouver indicate that Microsoft approached the studio's executive staff with the idea of them helming such a project. Allegedly, the two parties enthusiastically agreed that this quote-unquote Last of Us killer would be a full reboot of Dead Rising for Xbox One.
And the devs were more than happy to, since it wasn't just another Dead Rising game again. Little is known about this early version of 4, just that it wasn't connected to the other games, going off a completely different timeline, and described as being far more grounded, focusing on stealth, scavenging elements, and leaning harder into open world design. Instead of George Romero and Grindhouse Horror, they just directly name-dropped The Last of Us and Walking Dead as the inspirations.
This new vision was lending inspiration from popular zombie media media at the time, like The Walking Dead, but was also a manifestation of the studio's strong desire to create something different and more serious.
This all sounds extraordinarily ironic. I'll explain later, but for now let's finish the story. You see, while Microsoft and Capcom Vancouver were busy with this version of DR4, codenamed Climber, there was a certain somebody they forgot to let know. Capcom Japan. Yeah, Vancouver never actually told Capcom Japan what they were doing for the fourth entry. This totally radical shakeup to the Dead Rising franchise that moved away even more from the identity of the series, and they just expected it to be embraced by Japan. Well, what the fuck do you think happened?
In mid-2014, Vancouver's execs allegedly presented the game to a stunned audience of Capcom higher-ups, who were apparently less than pleased at their creation, to put it lightly. A former staffer offered their interpretation of Capcom's revulsion towards Climber. The brand of Dead Rising is not as malleable as Capcom Vancouver thought it was. I think they realized that it's not in the DNA of the series. Rebooting it that way is just going to make it align with all the other serious zombie titles that are out there, and it's going to make it conflict with what the fun of Dead Rising is, which is doing stupid shit to zombies.
Yeah, Capcom Japan hated it, ordering the devs to completely tear it all down and start from scratch. Not only that, but they were given a much tighter time window for release, a lower budget, and all around it seemed like Capcom Japan were directly punishing the studio. Microsoft also didn't allocate any money for the game, meaning Capcom Vancouver was up shit creek without a paddle. Plus, numerous high-level developers were fired mid-production, meaning leadership was all taken out back and gotten rid of while the studio was still struggling on how the hell they're gonna make the game. And the worst part? They couldn't even reuse a lot of the work they already did on Climber. It was just too different for the version of the game that they were forced to go back and make instead, a safer return to form that was more in line with what Capcom Japan saw Dead Rising as. So when they started from scratch, they quite literally had to build everything back up from scratch in a year and a half. Yeah, this is an aspect of the game that's downright sad. When the game came out, it was easy just to say Capcom Vancouver fucked up and made a bad game. Some even saying it was proof that they hated Dead Rising and wanted to kick out the naughty fans in favor of the modern audience, which that's not true, at least not fully. Yeah, it's true they were getting exhausted of making Dead Rising over and over again, and it's definitely true there is some spite mixed into 4 that's very easy to see and feel. But the game was a perfect storm of a lot of different fuck-ups colliding all at once. The spite is because they were essentially forced to build an entirely new game in an insanely short window of time, all while knowing how the story was going to end anyway. Capcom Vancouver was dead. Leadership was fired, Capcom Japan was rejecting even more pitches than ever before, including a spin-off of Resident Evil and even a Dino Crisis remake.
One such project was codenamed Rex, short for Resident Evil X, an action-driven spin-off of the horror series. The publisher rejected it as the public was souring on the more action-oriented RE games like Resident Evil 6. The Vancouver branch then attempted to revive survival horror series Dino Crisis with a new game for modern hardware. This endeavor never advanced beyond the pitching phase, being shot down by Capcom Japan after a few months of work.
And the remaining team was essentially put on a suicide mission they were not expected to survive. Of course, they couldn't make a Dead Rising game in a year and a half with a massively undercut budget. Anyone with common sense could tell you that. And the worst part is that this wasn't a case of corporate greed a la EA, at least not in full. No, this was all revenge. Capcom Japan wanted revenge against Vancouver for trying such a bold and downright stupid move to make a game behind their back and essentially strong-arming them into approving it. Since Climber was a ways into development, had the backing of Microsoft, and it was supposed to be the next mainline Dead Rising title, the idea seemed to be that they would get enough progress done on Climber that by the time Capcom Japan was made aware of it, they'd be able to impress them, meaning the game would get the green light, or Capcom would see how much was already spent on the budget and how much time was put into it, and they just go, fuck it, just get it done. It was a gamble, and unfortunately, Capcom called their bluff. Now, it's easy to see Capcom Japan as the bad guys in this scenario. They stomped down on Vancouver's creativity and demanded to go back into the Dead Rising mines. But really think about the situation here. Their side studio went behind them to Microsoft, not just a platform, but a direct competitor to Capcom. Reminder, Microsoft still had their first-party studios as well, and made a game so wide removed from Dead Rising it couldn't even be called the same name. Not only that, but the ideas just sounded bad. Like a Dead Rising game inspired by Last of Us? That's like making a Donkey Kong game inspired by Halo. It's two completely separate things you're trying to mix together. Last of Us is a stealth action horror game that focuses on a linear level progression with story being the top priority. Dead Rising is a time attack series by going through various labyrinths trying to get as much done as humanly possible. One is more narrative focused, the other is gameplay focused. You can make the argument all day long about the differences and if you really need to choose between them, but reality at the end of the day doesn't give a shit. People don't play Dead Rising for the story. They like the story, they like the characters, but the gameplay is the reason you are there. Learning them all, trying out different weapons, taking pictures, fighting psychopaths, all gameplay systems. The gameplay tied into the story, which is why the stories are simple but fun. You don't focus on the plot because it's just there to give you context behind why you're doing everything. And it's pretty obvious the only reason they want to take influence from Last of Us is because, honestly, they would only need to make half a game. Focus on cutscenes, make the plot linear as hell, have an excuse for why you don't need to include things like saving survivors or worrying about the timer. It's pretty obvious the entire idea of Climber was just Capcom Vancouver wanting to make a totally different game that they just slapped Dead Rising onto for the sake of having the name. Because when you hear about their pitch, it just sounds fucking stupid. Cinematic open world zombie game with a focus on scavenging and stealth. Yeah, I played Dying Light 2. It didn't have stealth as much, but Dead Island is also basically just that. That's why I said the whole story is ironic. It's not a story of Capcom Japan killing the dream game we never knew we wanted. Both roads led to people getting pissed off. The game Vancouver wanted to make comes out, Dead Rising isn't just watered down, it's literally not the same fucking franchise anymore. It's there to compete with Last of Us, which was the goal of Climber in the first place. It wasn't made to stand on its own 2 feet, it's there to be a cheap imitation, to a franchise people would get sick of anyway eventually. Capcom Vancouver was desperate to break out of Dead Rising, a series they found themselves chained to, just to chain themselves to a different franchise. And honestly, it makes perfect sense why Capcom Japan would crack down harder. Vancouver went behind their back and tried to turn one of their face franchises into a cheap ripoff of some other studio's game. No shit when they tried to say, let us make Resident Evil, they'd go, you're fucking with me right now, right? And you wanna know the best part of all this? That Dead Rising 5 pitch made things substantially worse. A chunk of what was left of Capcom Vancouver, well really it was a new team they hired and they also brought in some basically hired guns to work on it, tried to get the groundwork of DR5 in a vain attempt to keep the studio afloat. And the concepts put forward by 5 reeked of desperation. It would have brought back Chuck and Katie, they name-dropped Uncharted and Bloodborne as the inspirations.
The game's levels at this point in development have been likened primarily to those of Uncharted 4 due to their partly open nature and elements of exploration. This phase of the project lasted ultimately only a few months, however. Before the dust could settle on this latest iteration, it would undergo its most drastic shift yet in summer 2017. The team's remaining executives chose to reconfigure what had already been built into an action game heavily inspired by Dark Souls and Bloodborne.
What in the world?
Yeah, this didn't really get anywhere off the concepting phase. Holy shit. I'm not kidding, there was a very distinct possibility you would have had a Soulsborne Dead Rising game, because dear god if the trend chasing wasn't bad enough. So the team working on 4 was small, basically had no leadership, and they had much more work to do on the game. DR4 legitimately had such a bad development cycle, you just feel awful for Blue Castle, at least the grunts, even though it was technically all their fault. Yeah, they were tired of Dead Rising, but the idea you could just keep Capcom Japan out of the loop for one of their big franchises was just delusional, especially since it was specifically a mainline title. If they worked on Climber in secret and pitched it as a spin-off, maybe it would have went somewhere, but they tried to tie into the big leagues, and no shit that was gonna backfire. And boy, did it backfire. Before going any further, really think about this. It's been damn near 20 minutes into the video, and all we have done is just talk about how bad Dead Rising 4's development was. We have barely even touched on the game. That's a sign. Be warned. Yeah, Dead Rising 4 sucks. It sucks so bad. Hell, you can see the downgrade just from the visuals alone. Dead Rising 3 was criticized for having pretty washed out color palette, which is legitimate. The game wasn't exactly that colorful, but you could still see the graphical jump from the 360 PS3 generation to the new hardware, the Xbox One. For a 2013 game, it still looks pretty slick in some places. Character models in particular feel fleshed out and stylish. Dead Rising 4, by contrast, looks like a remaster for a 360 game, despite being developed solely for the Xbox One. This is on top of graphical glitches that pop up more than once, animation glitches, some mechanics just flat out don't really work. There's a lot wrong under the hood for this game, more than any other game in the series. Combat looks flashy, yeah, especially when you have a combo weapon that can just do big dumb AoE attacks, but physically playing the game is a different story. There's a lot wrong with the combat in Dead Rising 4. I'm not even talking about the streamlining. Yeah, the streamlining to the formula is barely even on the list compared to the shit I kept running into. It's to the point I look back on the decision to not include the timer as a net positive for the game, because dear god, wrangling this combat system and level design into a timer system would be hell, and not fun hell. Dead Rising 4 somehow takes the Dead Rising 3 combat system and makes it feel completely pointless, and also ball-bustingly unfair, somehow at the exact same time. How do you even do that? Well, for one, leveling up in the game really doesn't matter. You never feel distinctly powerful at the end game compared to first starting off. The only real difference is how many weapons you can carry. That's about the only upgrade worth investing into, since it just means more items on hand. At the same time, you need as many weapons on hand when you run into fights with the assorted damage sponge enemies that come to wreck your shit. Special zombies, evil suit dudes, maniacs, all of which can eat up durability durability way faster than you realize, and they love pulling cheap moves that eat at your health. I didn't die all that much in Dead Rising 4, main campaign at least. We were totally talking about the DLC. Frank Rising was oh boy. But there were more than a few close calls that had me more irritated than challenged, because human enemies simply aren't fun to fight in this game, nor the special zombies. Remember when I said the firemen and football zombies were damage sponges in Dead Rising 3 that really weren't that fun to fight? Alright, now imagine they came back, were substantially more annoying since they all do the exact same thing, and eat up way more hits and health. Yeah, they love to pin you down, distract you, act as hit sponges, and eat up any weapon you're throwing at them. Human enemies are the worst, however, because Jesus Christ, the game always broke down the absolute worst when I was fighting another human being. From animations breaking to the point of had guys just spamming combos they shouldn't have been able to spam, to melting in just a few hits for no reason. Human enemies in Dead Rising 4 come in two extremes: completely tedious nobodies you can take out with a single headshot, or absolute tanks that take an entire assault rifle magazine to the skull before they think about going down. And I wasn't playing on a hard difficulty. It was standard mode for both campaigns, main story and ending DLC. And as day, it's not like it was particularly difficult. It's just one guy decided a bump to the noggin was enough to make him see God, and another guy was like Guts himself, beaten half to death and refusing to stay down. It was the difference between a branch snapping with a single footstep and hitting a fucking chainsaw to cut through a slightly thicker branch. No logic behind what enemy is really stronger than another. I've had guys in power armor go down in 3 hits, meanwhile minions to a mini-boss take everything I have to kill a single one. Why is the guy in the literal mech suit easier to kill than a weirdo dressed as a Christmas elf? Another detail to mention is that enemies don't really have movesets. Like, they do, but if you pay attention, all they're doing is copying Frank's moves. Sometimes it's so obvious you see them spinning their arms like you could do in Dead Rising 1. You can argue it's a reference, but having multiple enemies across the campaign regardless of faction do it? Yeah, no, they just reused it because it was easy to copy and paste. Now obviously, since we're talking about combat, we should mention the main gimmick of Dead Rising: combo weapons. To put it simply, combo weapons are fine. They bring back pretty much all the blueprints from Dead Rising 3, add a few new ones on top of that, and all of them are Christmas themed because that's a big aspect of the game, I guess. And none felt particularly offensive. They get the job done as crowd clears or heavy damage focused on a boss. Fighting regular zombie hordes can scratch that itch in your brain that looks at a big crowd of undead and says, make them dead, until you run into the new type of zombie that specifically interrupts the flow, such as deflecting an attack, ruining your combo, or pulling off their bullshit lunge that takes an eternity to break out of and will eat a chunk of health no matter what you do. Even if you successfully break out of the lunge, you're losing at least 15% of your health. And these guys love going for the lunge. I've had situations where I break out of one attack just to immediately be hit by another one as soon as the zombie resets. It's crazy how clunky it feels. When I say they can deflect your attack, I'm not kidding. They can just say no. Like, you've got a good flow for combat and I know where to get up close cinematic where the special zombie interrupts you. There's not really a reason why. They just pull off an interrupt because they can, and that leads to them being able to do a counter. It's the reason why the combat feels so stiff and less fun than the other games, because you never really get that sense of power over the horde that the older games let you have. Unless you have one of the super over-the-top combo weapons that can just nuke an entire neighborhood. Yeah, unless you have one of those things, which to be fair, you can get a lot of, that's why I say the game's not particularly hard, it's just annoying, you're going to be dealing with a special zombie doing everything it can to keep you from gaining momentum. It's to the point I found myself mainly using guns by the end, because try dodge canceling buckshot. Now, a Dead Rising game having guns be useful to the point of being kind of OP is not a bad thing. All the way back in DR1, you could trivialize certain fights by cornering a psychopath with a gun, but I wasn't using guns because they were just the better option for a situation. I was using guns because I'd rather dump ammo into something than deal with the clunky bullshit of trying to fight certain enemies in melee. Really, it wouldn't shock me if certain fights were developed specifically with the idea of using a gun above anything else. Some for sure are. The Tom fight has him up above you, just poking his head out from time to time, so it's obvious you're meant to shoot him. But Maniac fights are so half-baked, I can't imagine anyone wanting to fight them legitimately is gonna have a good time. Especially when you realize they're all the same fight. Maniacs are the new psychopaths, mini bosses that pop up across the open world that you can go and deal with as a form of a side quest. You show up, you get a brief introduction to the Maniac's gimmick, then their ads show up, you fight them, the Maniac arrives, you damage the Maniac, they vanish for a bit, their ads show up again, rinse and repeat until dead. Every Maniac is just this over and over again. It's to the point I only did a handful of these because it was all the same thing. You beat one, you basically beat them all, which is the appropriate phrase for Dead Rising 4. If you see one thing in the game, you're seeing every example of it. There are no dedicated survivor quests anymore. You have Radiant quests where you either save someone from a horde, save someone from hostile humans, or for very rare occasions, you run into somebody that has you do a challenge for them. It's this over and over again. All level up survivor shelters, which act like the safe zones from Dead Rising 3. The only real gimmick with these is that they have survivors who can sell you items or upgrades, and the more people you have in their vicinity, then the more they level up, giving you access to more stuff. The system itself is not bad, especially since the shelters do visibly have more people inside them them the more they level up. That's all this is. Window dressing for shop inventory. Shops that only really work to get you more weapons or skills for an upgrade tree that's really not that helpful. And the only weapons that are really any good are either guns or ones with such over-the-top gimmicks you can chew through the interrupts from the special zombies. So combat sucks, and there's really not much to do in the open world. What else? Well, the open world itself is just kind of okay. The big gimmick of the game is you return to Willamette. In particular, they try to hint that the mall is the focus of the entire story. The outbreak kicks off there. The first area you end up in once you get past the prologue is the mall, and it seems like a much more expansive version of what came before. Except it's not. That's a fucking lie. The mall looks cool, sure, but it just feels like a singular chunk compared to the absolute labyrinth the Willamette Mall was in the original. Of course, it's not just the mall. You have the entire town and surrounding industrial area around the town to explore, and being able to tear through small town America infested with zombies is kinda cool, but don't tease me that we're going back to Willamette if it's barely even a factor whatsoever, especially when you realize how tight and restricted it really ends up being. They say it's bigger and better than the original mall, supposedly now the largest mall in America, yet it feels like a smaller map from Dead Rising 1. Now, some people really hated the Christmas gimmick, saying it dates the game and means that you don't really see a reason to play it if it's not holiday season. I understand the complaint. Hearing Christmas music is like the MK Ultra trigger phrase for retail workers, but I'm not too upset about that. I like Christmas. So seeing festive decorations and snow makes me feel cozy more than annoyed. Even the soundtrack, which is all just different renditions of classic Christmas jingles, felt more cheery than a knife against the ears. I don't know, maybe it's a personal preference thing. The Christmas gimmick doesn't annoy me because it's Christmas. It's annoying because it has literally nothing to do with the story. Yeah, despite how heavy Christmas influences the look and feel of the game, there's outright a 2D animated cutscene sent to a warped version of a Christmas jingle showing the outbreak. There's no reason whatsoever for the game to take place around Christmas. This could have taken place around Halloween and absolutely nothing would change. Even the excuse that everybody was massacred at Black Friday doesn't matter because you can just change it to be that everyone was there for the mall's reopening alone. It's a Christmas game because Christmas, fuck you. You'd think the story would revolve around the holiday. Dead Rising games famously have a lot of social commentary in them. The story's focusing on a central theme and everything about the plot and characters revolving around it. Dead Rising 1 was about consumerism in the meat industry. Dead Rising 2 is about big pharma. Dead Rising 3 was about trading freedom for security and how that's not a good deal. You get the idea. So you probably think of Dead Rising 4's commentary about holiday shopping. Maybe pointing out Christmas isn't anything like how it started anymore, going from a time of year about being good to your fellow man and appreciating your loved ones to mindless consumerism and ironically showing the worst habits of people. But it doesn't. Hell, it's hard to really see any theme in Dead Rising 4's story, and there's a reason for that. See, before we delve into the story, I'm going to reiterate something that I mentioned before. Dead Rising 4's development was hellish. There was very little leadership, time, or money put into this. The dev team suffered the consequences of a lack of focus and trying to turn Dead Rising into something it was never meant to be. DR4 was originally going to be a Last of Us killer, which anyone who knows the history of ex-killer games could tell you how that was a bad idea. And Dead Rising 5 was... well, they dropped the terms Uncharted 4, Assassin's Creed, and Souls-like during development. That shit was not going to turn out okay. Which was the main problem. Capcom Vancouver was so desperate to do anything that wasn't Dead Rising that they seemed to be resentful of the franchise. Now I'm talking solely about the leadership and the producers, the ones who caused all this, not the developers themselves. Those guys were just the grunts trying to keep the ship from sinking when the inevitable happened, and Capcom Japan came in going, what the fuck are you people doing? Dead Rising 4 is literally an unfinished game. It was slapped together from scratch in around a year and a half, so much of what we see from half-baked systems and confused tone and story come from the fact the developers didn't have the time to really finish the game. We're looking at placeholders. So many zombie designs repeat. The orange jacket became a common criticism for a reason, because they literally didn't have the time to make more. Maniacs aren't in the game because they thought it would be more respectful than psychopaths. That was the public explanation. The truth is, no one had time to make them.
Psychopaths, which had served as boss encounters in each game before it, were controversially missing from Dead Rising 4, but were considered early on. In the first internal demo produced for the game, the developers included a psychopath named Reindeer Man. Shortly thereafter, concerns arose that having psychos would be deemed inappropriate for having the player beat up characters with mental and physical disabilities. The final nail in the coffin for these villains, however, was the lack of time and budget needed to implement them. Developers say that the psychos from previous games were expensive to produce, requiring their own custom behaviors, animations, music, and cinematics. The decision to cut psychos was partly walked back on the advice of a passionate few members of the team who insisted that fans would care if they were left out. As a compromise, maniacs were added midway into development, a series of basic mini-bosses made on a fraction of the budget.
Hell, the actual developer team fought to include them because they knew they were a staple to Dead Rising. Sure, they're half-baked and nowhere near as close to what even the worst psychopaths from the franchise were, but that's because they physically couldn't finish any of them. It was the higher-ups who originally didn't want them who, as we've already discussed, caused the entire fiasco anyway. There's no timer because there was no time to balance the game around a timer, which is why I said that's a blessing in disguise for Dead Rising 4. A game this clunky, half-baked, buggy, and tedious suddenly demanding a time limit would drive people insane. Wanna know why? Because the DLC does that, and it drove me insane. The timer in the other games wasn't just slapped in at the last second. The games themselves are built around the timer. It was the biggest mechanic that had other mechanics hanging off of it. Everything from item durability, placement, psychopath movesets, survivor quests, story pacing, endings. Every aspect of Dead Rising 1 and 2 had to be made with the timer in mind. You can't just slap a timer in the game and call it a day. Dead Rising 3 did that, and it felt pretty ancillary to the point they had to patch in a stricter one later to make the game more tense. But for 4, there simply wasn't anything to balance for a timer. There were no real side objectives or distractions that could impact your ability to beat the game. It's all Radiant quests or story missions. There's no point locking off parts of the story for free time when there's nothing to do in that free time. Sure, you can kill zombies, but that's it. Even the story was impacted by the horrendous dev cycle, to the point the developers themselves were well aware it sucks and not all what they wanted to do. You see, during DR4's development, they dealt with routine crackdowns by Capcom. A lot of senior figures were fired, including Anna Reed, who is a pretty crucial figure for the writing of Dead Rising 4. Since this was the main writer for Dead Rising 2, both Case Zero and Case West, Off the Record, and Dead Rising 3. Someone who knew how to make a Dead Rising story feel like Dead Rising. Well, when she left, the remaining team had to completely rewrite the story from scratch in a year and a half. Considering the circumstances, I'm amazed it's even legible, let alone has a beginning and end. Yeah, the story sucks. It's not funny. Frank isn't Frank, and it has some baffling retcons and plot holes. But this is a game that was going down like the Titanic in real time for them. They knew it sucked and was half finished just like everybody else.
We knew the game was going to be bad while working on it. The ambitions for it were simply too big for the development length. One apparent casualty of the rushed development was the game's writing. Former developers recall the game's story scribes having little time to iterate upon dialogue or plot elements, negatively impacting its script and depiction of key characters like Frank West. Nobody on the team went out there trying to make Frank a sarcastic dickhead. The problem was that everything was written at such a breakneck pace, but we didn't have enough time to fix it.
But they had to ship something in the hopes they could keep everybody employed. It's not their fault that leadership decided to piss off the bosses and cause the spiral that led to the closure of the entire studio. And really is sad because you can see glimpses of legitimate love for Capcom buried beneath all the snark and wannabe attempts at quips, but it was too little, too late. Honestly, it's hard to even beat down on the story after reading about how it all went down. It's a literal placeholder plot. It wasn't meant to be the final story. But they did charge full price for it, so fuck it, let's give it a shot. Yeah, from here on, it's spoilers for Dead Rising 4's story. I'd say I play the game before going any further, but I don't want to get in trouble from YouTube for encouraging self-harm. Just watch the Snake Roars video on DR4, it's really good. So DR4's story exists. It follows characters as they go through a plot, and there is an ending. That's about all you can say. In all seriousness, the attempt is there. They want to bring back Frank and sort of challenge the character on his ego and show a version of the guy that's long past his heyday, which they already did in Off the Record, but fuck it, technically that game is not canon. Frank West has retired from the limelight a full 15 years after the events of the original game, now working as a professor of journalism for an unnamed college. The game opens with Frank having a nightmare, imagining himself still trapped in Willamette during the outbreak. As he fights Stay Alive, he hears different characters and himself giving a sort of highlight reel of his adventures. Carlito's there, Jesse, Dr. Barnaby, then you hear Frank himself as he brags about how great he is.
Why should the public believe me? Because I'm Frank freaking West. I'm a goddamn hero. Yeah, I know. Not my greatest hit.
Showing that the guy is fully consumed by the celebrity lifestyle. Now, this is an aspect of Frank that is covered in earlier Dead Rising media. The comics talk about how he sort of became an Alex Jones-style conspiracy journalist, and yeah, he kind of started to buy into his own hype, leading him into tanking his career and becoming a has-been. That was a major part of Off the Record, which is why I mentioned that game earlier. Still, the first thing to mention is Frank's voice.
I don't need this. I have millions of fans who know I speak the truth. Yeah, I may have overestimated by 4 or 6 zeros. So what?
Yeah, that's not TJ Rotolo. Instead, Frank is voiced by a guy named Ty Olsson. Capcom Vancouver wanted a different voice for Frank that could reflect the passage of time, since he was intended to be a gruffer, older version of the guy. This is neglecting the fact that Ty Olsson sounds younger than TJ does now.
I clawed my way out of Willamette. I fought hard to uncover the truth of what happened at that mall. things were good. Real good. For a while.
That was an inside job, don't you get it? It was the feds! It was a conspiracy! All right! Can the demo reel? I've seen enough!
Hell, he was younger than TJ. Ty Olsson was 42 when Dead Rising 4 was being made. TJ Rotolo was 50, a full 8-year difference. But honestly, I'm not even mad TJ didn't come back for Frank. I love the guy, but hearing his voice trying to do some of this dialogue would have been painful. And honestly, it kinda is sad for Ty Olsson as well. The guy's not a bad actor. There's actually a few moments where I do think he had the chops to play Frank. Maybe not in an official game, but in a side game, a spin-off, something like that. He doesn't do a terrible job, it's just the script letting him down. Because to put it simply, this guy is not Frank. This is the biggest aspect everyone hates about Dead Rising 4. Frank himself. Frank in the original Dead Rising is a sleazy paparazzi that knew exactly what kind of man he was. Self-centered, a tad arrogant, a tad lecherous, but he was the guy with the balls to fight for the truth, and he was genuinely heroic, willing to go out of his way to save total strangers just because he was the guy that could. Dead Rising 4 Frank is Deadpool, and not even good Deadpool. A guy obsessed with making quips and lame jokes to the point that he comes across like a psychotic man-child above anything else. This isn't even flanderization, because Frank was never the funny guy. Frank was cool. When he made a quip or a joke in older games, it came from a place of confidence, a badass action one-liner, like when he fought psychopaths in Off the Record or bantered with Chuck in Case West.
Wait, Frank West. Frank West? No, I've heard of you.
Oh, this never goes well.
Maybe you've heard of my late brother. Used to work at the Willamette Mall. See, there were witnesses who said he was fighting someone with a camera.
If Adam was your brother, I'd hate to meet your sister.
Frank is supposed to feel like almost a kind of con artist. He knows what to say to have that classic style of suave and badass. On top of being just a kind of no bullshit guy. He's willing to say what needs to be said to get through to somebody and hold his cards close to his chest when he isn't sure if it's the right time. When it comes time for him to have his hero moment, he can absolutely sell it because he takes the situation dead serious. But in Dead Rising 4, Frank is just Deadpool. Hell, half his quips don't even make sense for the situation. Like to have him just not save a guy who's taped to a chair because funny.
And it's moving through the sewers, so they lured it here. To catch it.
I can show you where. Untie me, quick. We'll go together.
What the shit was that?
The monster. Frank, hey, come on. Get me out of here.
Sit tight, Darcy. You'll be safe here. Probably.
What? Hey, you can't leave me here. Come on, man.
Even though Frank, in this game alone, has already saved numerous people from situations that were way more dangerous. Which is another big aspect why this version of Frank doesn't make any sense. The main conflict with Frank the story tries to push is that he's a sleazy journalist. He uses people, warps facts, and doesn't actually care about the issue. Which is complete bullshit for anybody who played the older games, since those were all about Frank going out of his way to get involved with the story, from saving people, tracking down leads, and interviewing suspects. Which, funny enough, this game addresses as well. Frank is still a really effective journalist in this game. He's the one who finds out about the full story and saves numerous people, which flies in the face of what the story is talking about. It's not just ludonarrative dissonance, it's a pretty massive red flag that the game we're seeing is not finished. This version of the story is just rough ideas and concepts that have not been refined. It tries to contrast Frank with his journalism student, Vic. She's Haley from American Dad. That's not a joke. She's a girl who is modern, a wannabe activist that has to care about every issue in the world and believes that she's better than Frank because she cares. Then it's revealed she's a hypocritical idiot that gets manipulated by the bad guys numerous times and actively got people killed. Yeah, over and over again they have Vic scream at Frank for being a sleazy journalist who doesn't actually care about the people involved. And it reeks of being an unfinished idea because you physically see the opposite countless times. Even when you listen to Frank's dialogue, as quip-filled and stupid as it is, you do see what he is talking about. He makes good points in his arguments with Vic, but then the scene has to paint him as wrong, so they have him undercut his own argument. When he says that he's a reporter and it's his job to report, he's completely right. Frank is not a vigilante that's there to stop the main bad guy's plot. He only ever becomes that due to circumstances that he can't control, and because if he did nothing, the consequences would be hellish. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here, let's get back on track. So the actual opening of the game is Vic tricking Frank into going back to Willamette, Colorado. Despite his obvious reluctance, Vic Vic talks Frank into helping her infiltrate a facility controlled by a PMC group known as Obscurus. They are tied to disappearances in the area and seem to be up to some nasty shit. Frank decides to teach Vic his ways as they break into the facility, and there's some obvious friction right as the mission begins. Frank has no issue using violence as they go through the facility, knocking out a guard, which I put in quotes because yeah, it was the stealth kill, and making a joke after putting down a zombie.
Who wants barbecue? No? No one?
Holy shit, Frank. This is some atrocity level shit going on here, and the best you can do is crack wise?
That is unfair. I have photographed things and thought about things.
You don't actually care what's happening to these people, do you?
Look, let's just get what we came for and get out of here, okay?
This escalates as the two dig deeper inside, culminating in the duo discovering that the facility has experimented with the parasite, creating a new form of the infection that allows them to experiment on zombies despite the cure already being widespread, on top of cloning human victims to further their own goals. Oh, by the way, as a quick aside, the new camera system legit only exists because the higher-ups wanted to piggyback off the Arkham games detective vision for Batman. That is the entire point of the gimmick. It is barely worth mentioning. Back on point, Obscurus been cloning human subjects and using them for their experiments. Wait, I think I already said that. It doesn't matter, I'm barely keeping up with this story as it is. With the new generation of zombies appearing much more feral and aggressive than the simple, shambling corpses of old, the two find a woman who is turned and rabid in her cell. Frank documents her, much to Vic's disgust. She puts the woman down and accuses Frank of just trying to profit off the suffering of the victims to Obscurus.
They're gonna be testing some kind of bio-weaponized version of the virus. No! Damn it! What happened to get the story and get out?
I couldn't just.
Stay calm, Vic. That's what I said. Stay fucking calm. Now you put us both in danger.
You were just gonna leave her? Just use her?
We need to get out of here. Do you understand me?
For your pictures! Your stupid pictures!
I'm a reporter, Vic. That's what I do. I report. And if you can't do the same, if you can't take yourself out of the picture, then you should get the hell out of here.
And this is the first moment you realize Vic is going to be a massive pain in the ass. She is a stuck-up, naive idiot that has no idea why Frank is really doing what he's doing. Vic is the exact kind of journalist that has ruined the reputation of journalism. Yeah, Frank is sleazy. He did go into Willamette in the original game with the intention of making money. But once he realized how bad the situation really was, the guy quickly shifted into helping whoever he could. You can be self-centered and still end up being a good person. You don't have to have a savior complex to be a hero. In fact, having that savior complex can result in you hurting way more people than you save. Remember this. Also, think of it like this. Frank could have slipped in, got the evidence of what Obscurus was doing, and caught them with their pants down after releasing the story. They wouldn't have time to cover up everything because they wouldn't have realized they even had an intruder in the first place. And once the public knew about what they were doing, they were fucked. The government isn't exactly the same one that wanted to weaponize zombies like Dead Rising 3. They very much take the presence of zombies seriously now. And a PMC experimenting on American citizens to re-weaponize the parasite wouldn't be something they could buy their way out of. Everything about the situation screams get the proof and get out before they can cover everything up. But Vic, in her infinite retardation, shoots the zombie in the cell, alerting the entire facility. She wants to burn the whole place to the ground. Which, yeah, of course you do. This place ain't great, it's pure evil, I get it, but you don't have that luxury. Your job is to get the info out so the public is aware. You're not Superman. It's not your job to play soldier, especially since what's the end game? You destroy this facility and then what? Either you release a bunch of zombies out in the open world since your dipshit ass didn't think about the logistics of destroying the place, or you take this one place down and Obscura simply opens another one. You can't prove what they did because the place is destroyed, meaning all the evidence is burned up or unable to be gotten, and Obscurus faces no repercussions, meaning a slight inconvenience they can easily rectify later. Now you would think that this is the point of Vic's character. She's too emotionally immature to understand that a journalist has to stomach seeing some horrendous shit for the sake of the story. Yes, there are people you just cannot save. It sucks, but your goal is the truth, not what makes you feel good. And maybe this was the point of her character. Since the game is blatantly unfinished, they didn't have time to make the argument more even-handed and show more flaws with Vic's logic, since there are flaws you can plainly see. But as it stands, the story completely agrees with Vic, saying that Frank is just a sellout who only cares about his own glory.
Well, that's creepy. What a shot. Oh, yeah, that's really good.
Every conversation makes that abundantly clear at every step. Now, I'm fine with Frank needing to learn a lesson, but this lesson isn't one that Frank needs to learn. The guy was shown all the way back in Dead Rising 1 that he's not a typical sleazy journo. He very much cares about the full story and the people affected by it. Hell, the guy makes a promise to Carlito, the genocidal terrorist, that he will tell his side of the story, simply because the public has the right to know about what happened to Santa Cabeza.
Why? Why did my people have to die to feed your fat bellies?
That doesn't excuse what you've done. But I promise, the Santa Cabeza story will be told.
Frank just isn't the guy that the plot keeps saying he is. He never warps facts to fit his own agenda. He doesn't hide details that don't make him look good. He will put the story at risk to help someone out because they need help. All the things the plot in 4 keeps saying he does or does not do. To make a long story short, Frank releases a bunch of zombies in the facility to escape, only to realize Vic left him behind, fully cutting him out of her life. Once again, Vic is a total asshole. I really hope she gets the dramatic character death treatment. Sometime later, it's revealed that Frank has been completely ruined by the US government, forced to teach at a shitty college under a pseudonym after his story about Obscurus was buried for lack of evidence. Hey, remember that part I just said about how if they just got the proof and left without any incidents, they could have caught Obscurus off guard and broke the story? Thanks a lot, Vic, you complete fucking moron. And to make matters worse, Willamette's suffering another outbreak. During Black Friday, the same advanced form of the infection that they saw in the facility is now spreading in the town. Now the whole place is under quarantine. You wouldn't be remiss to assume this is connected to the facility. Hell, the timing is way too coincidental. The facility was right outside Willamette, it was around the same time frame, and it was the same form of infection they were experimenting with, but they're not connected. Probably because confirming that the infection was Frank's fault would have been a step too far. Plus, you could easily tie it to Vic being a dumbass since she shot the zombie in the cell and alerted security, meaning players who already didn't like her would have downright despised her. Yeah, Frank was the one who let the zombies out of containment during his escape, but he did that because he was trying to get away from a situation that Vic caused. And it's not like players wouldn't hate Frank on top of it too. This isn't Frank, this is Hank. Yeah, the player base just adopted Frank's pseudonym as his actual name for the game. This isn't Frank West, this is Hank East. Basically, they confirmed a connection between the prologue and the main story. You would have two emotionally immature man-children that just killed thousands of people over a dumbass argument. Still, Frank wants to avoid ever going back into Willamette, but he's tipped off that Vic is in town. She arrived to break the story, so Frank decides to go to make sure she's okay. Oh boy, what a selfish asshole, am I right? Making sure his student that hates him is okay because that's the right thing to do? Yeah, sure. It's also because he could find proof proving that Obscurus was evil so he could clear his name, as the government labeled him a terrorist after the events of the prologue. Once again, I genuinely hate Vic so much. Also, yeah, they try to lean into a thing of like, oh, he wants to make sure he gets the story instead of her, but dude, come on. We all know it's to make sure she's fine. Fuck it, whatever. And if you're confused on who this guy is, this is Brad Park. You might recognize him from one of the DLC episodes of Dead Rising 3, a ZDC agent that learns his own organization is corrupt and goes rogue. Well, in the time since Dead Rising 3 to now, he's been promoted to Colonel, reforming the organization and turning it back into a helpful group that wants to save people from zombies. I'd say he matters, but he doesn't. Brad vanishes from the game for a very long time after the opening, only showing up periodically for radio calls, and then at the very end. Still, Frank flies back into Willamette with Brad, and their helicopter is shot down by Obscurus, straying the two in the zombie-infested hellscape. From here, the story quickly becomes a mishmash of things happen and zombie stuff. Frank has tracked down leads to what Obscurus is doing, what Vic is doing, and eventually solved the main plot. The big mystery of the game is what exactly is Obscurus doing with the parasite? What is the point of making the infection dangerous again? There's already a cure. There's no point poking that bear. There's even a new form of infection called fresh zombies. This version is far faster, turning victims immediately after infection and causing the newly turned to be way more aggressive. Once again, nobody would blame you for thinking the prologue is connected to a new outbreak. Way too much shit is lining up to think they're unrelated, but they actually are just unrelated. It's an insane oversight. Still, the only plot points to remember are that Obscurus is going around doing unethical shit, kidnapping and killing people. There's a gang of looters in the town that all wear gas masks, and there's signs that there's some kind of monster going around causing chaos. When you actually break down the plot of Dead Rising 4, there really isn't a lot to say. It's a mixture of go here and fight bad guys and various fetch quests. Hell, at the time of writing the script, I just beat the game yesterday, and I already don't remember very large chunks of the plot. It just isn't memorable or interesting enough to stick in your mind. It's also absurdly short. If you rush the main story, don't do any side content, and only focus on the campaign, you can easily beat this game in maybe 5 hours or so, and that's with a good chunk of padding added onto it. For instance, the first chapter forces you into a side quest where you fight a maniac and her gang, a bunch of people living in the mall that have gone crazy and think they're actual medieval knights.
Beg pardon, my lord, but this here's the sovereign land of the mighty Queen Sandra, so ye can go and fucketh right off! Well, hey there! I did not know the Historical Shithead Society was in town. What did you just say to me? Well, if Queen Sandra is half as inbred as she sounds, then she's my kind of lady. You'll pay for that! Your mother was a gopher and your father smells of body spray. Hey,
Open up so I can teach this old fart a lesson!
Didn't Sunset Overdrive do this? Wait, Saints Row Reboot kinda did the same joke too. Huh. Still, Frank kills them all and that's the end of that plot thread. They never come back and you see some of the gas mask looters fight alongside them, which, when you realize who they are, you're probably thinking how that makes zero sense. But shut up. Still, Frank is back to juggling multiple plates as he fights for the truth, running into not just Obscurus, but this podcaster and her friend Darcy, who act as small recurring characters. They run a show inspired by Frank West, where they also look into various zombie outbreaks and try to tie them into larger conspiracies.
Are you Darcy's girlfriend? What's going on here?
I'm his editor, and this was a major Obscurus outpost until 40 minutes ago.
Wait a minute. You're Paula? You sound totally different on the radio.
Oh yeah, that's my character.
Character?
Yeah, I realize no one listens to me unless I'm yelling all the time. And also, it's kind of fun.
The actual podcaster lady Paula acts as your radio guide, much like Otis in 1, Stacy in 2, and Jamie in 3. And I'm immediately asking why it's not Brad instead. You know, the ZDC agent that arrived with Frank and would have more of an understanding on how to coordinate things like survivor rescue? Alright, because there's no side quest in this game. So Paula's just there to scream at you about maniac fights you can do.
Hey, it's Paula. While you're out there, I need you to run down a few stories for the podcast.
If I get around to it.
I'm sending you what I got. Now go forth, Apostle Frank. Get the story. Find the truth. I'll call you later.
Point withdrawn, even if that means Brad is literally only there for Frank to explain parts of the plot to and then hang up on instead of having an actual dynamic. Alright, so the story goes on and Frank finds out that Obscurus is in Willamette to track down a creature only known as Calder, some kind of super zombie that's intelligent and extremely dangerous. Alright, not a bad idea, kind of vibing with that, especially since they make it clear that Calder isn't trying to be funny. Dude is vicious with how he dispatches his targets. At the same time, Frank comes in contact with a group of survivors that have been dealing with the zombies, Calder and Obscurus, for over a month, led by a mentally unstable man named Tom. Tom and his group are violent, but considering the circumstances, that can be forgiven. Literally everything has been trying to kill them for a few weeks. We even find out that there are total innocents in the group that are just trying to stay away from Obscurus. The two groups have been waging war ever since the whole thing started. Frank promises to help free them in exchange for them helping him with his story. And the first mission revolves around saving a woman named Hammond. While Tom is clearly shady and not one to trust, Hammond is the humanity to the group, a capable leader that just wants to keep as many people as she can alive. The plot goes along and eventually Frank finds out Obscurus is actually... Oh, you've got to be fucking kidding me. Yeah, Vic actually teamed up with Obscurus, selling out portions of Tom's group to them to get access to sources within Obscurus for her story. She sold out people to the violent paramilitary group that was experimenting on human beings and turning them into zombies. Hey Vic, remember how you bitched at Frank about him taking advantage of people and profiting off their suffering? Aren't you doing that exact thing 10 times worse because you're just directly leading to people dying?
All right, make it quick. You were attacked by an armed group yesterday. They killed 2 of your men?
One was a man, the other a woman. Tenure officers and friends.
I know where they're gonna hit you next. I know how many are going, I know the name of the leader. I know where they hide their food. With that kind of information, it could prevent a lot of unnecessary death.
She even justifies it by going, it's what Frank would do, or going, at least I give people food and blankets.
Some survivors are gathered together under a guy named Tom. He's been making sure they have food and supplies, training up a few volunteers to serve as anti-zombie militia. One of Tom's people is a woman named Hammond, who's going to show me around the city. Tom wants me to report back whatever I learn, so he's agreed to provide me with food and shelter while I'm here. Pretty fair trade, I think, since he's living what I'm writing. I'm not here to profit off of his suffering. Could you describe her again, please? Just on the record.
Oh, sure. She was a middle-aged woman. A bit skittish, you know, but who isn't?
Right.
Joe said he recognized her, said she was a doctor from up at the training center. She'd come into town to buy snacks and things during her break. We were gonna call out to her, cause, heck, a doctor would be real useful. But...
You mentioned she used flash grenades?
Yeah, she did. Zombies went down, and then she fiddled with them. Took samples or something. Joe and I took one look at each other and noped right out of there, let me tell you.
Thank you so much for telling me. I really appreciate it. Would you like a can of spaghetti hoops, or would you prefer dried garbanzo beans? Take whatever you need.
Bitch, you got people killed. What are you talking about? Who gives a fuck that you gave a guy a can of soup? He still got a bullet in the head. Obscurus is insanely evil. One of the Radiant quests is to literally save survivors who are being kidnapped by Obscurus. I actually did one of those right before this very mission. So, what the fuck? Everything in the plot, even with full context, was 100% their fault. They are bad guys. And they're committing the exact sins that got you so heated in the prologue. Not only does Vic justify working with Obscurus, but she goes out of her way to defend them by saying, well, they didn't cause the outbreak.
Well, I am definitely not conspiring with a paramilitary group. Not doing that, Vic.
It's not what I'm doing.
And I'm not torturing a woman for a quote while a bunch of trigger-happy jarheads guard the door. I'm not doing that either.
That's not what I'm doing.
Shut up!
It's not what I'm doing.
What are you doing? Because I'm having a hard time seeing it.
I am trying to figure out who these soldiers are working for, how the outbreak began, and what these assholes did.
You sold out Hammond and her people. They almost got killed. Do you know that? Are you aware of that?
The commander issued a no-kill order, and then Tom's people attacked first.
It's false.
Get a squad out there. Capture or kill, your discretion.
But they kinda did though. Yeah, it wasn't an intentional spread like what Phoenotrans did in Fortune City or Los Perdidos, but they created a new form of the parasite that caused Calder and the fresh zombies. Those would not exist if they weren't still experimenting. They kidnap people and turn them into zombies. What the fuck is wrong with you? Well, that's a question I have a theory for. You see, I stated numerous times, Dead Rising 4 is literally not finished. It's barely 40% of what they wanted to do, and this definitely impacts the story as well. I think the idea was that Vic would have been revealed as projecting her flaws onto Frank, who in the game shows that he's not what Vic thinks he is. He never makes a deal with the devil for the story. He saves people, gets closer to the truth than she ever did in his way shorter time in Willamette, and ends up saving the day. Meanwhile, Vic gets people killed, gets more wrapped up in feeling good than actually investigating, and resorts to stealing Frank's work to pass it off as her own. All the things she accuses Frank of doing.
This is what this is all about for you, isn't it? Just take what you want and cash the check.
Get out of here, rookie.
Poacher. That's all you'll ever be.
Vic is essentially a new version of Ken from Dead Rising 1. Ken was the psychopath that was basically the evil Frank, another photojournalist who gave zero shits about human life, even kidnapping a guy and trying to infect him with a parasite so he can get a picture of a guy turning into a zombie. Vic, and I truly believe this, was meant to walk a similar path, only worse because she would have justified it all to herself. I'm not the bad guy, I'm just doing this for the greater good. Hell, during production of this video, I completely forgot that there was an audio log from Vic that talks about how her betrayal of Hammond led to a gunfight, with Vic believing Hammond and her whole team died.
Heard the ambush ended with gunfire. I have no idea if Hammond made it out alive. The end justifies the means, right? Using people as resources to get the next piece of the story? I keep thinking, this is exactly what Frank would do.
Now, for full context, because I didn't actually bring up the differences between Tom and Hammond that much, but Tom is a complete psychopath that's going full 1984 Big Brother on his compound, and while Hammond wants to revolt against him and, you know, not indiscriminately murder people. This conflict led to Vic betraying them because she saw Tom as a massive piece of shit and shacking up with Obscurus. Even though her portrayal of Hammond means that there couldn't be a revolt, meaning Tom couldn't actually be ousted, and Hammond, the person she actually liked and considered the real leader of the group, wouldn't take power and keep people alive. Yeah, Vic's an idiot. Meanwhile, Frank, the one who is supposedly the sleazy asshole who did things the wrong way, would have gotten way more done and actually saved people, which would have driven Vic insane. Everything she did got people killed and helped fuel the monster she hated. Hell, it wouldn't even have to end with her dying, just realizing she was manipulated into doing something terrible by the promise of the glory, learning that lesson herself all too late, whatever the consequence to it may be. But they never had time to actually flesh this plot point out, so we're just left with the knowledge that Vic was a total idiot, the exact worst person you'd want to run into in a zombie outbreak. Alright, fuck this. From here on out, we're going broad strokes. This story's barely existent. So Frank runs into a woman who used to work with Dr. Barnaby. She's just as delusional as Barnaby, but more outwardly evil. They also retcon Barnaby as still experimenting on the parasite after Santa Cabeza, consumed with the idea that zombies were a key to human immortality. This is, of course, ignoring that Barnaby desperately wanted to cover up that zombies existed. He never once showed any sort of hint that he wanted to experiment with them. He just wanted to make fatter cattle. The whole point of Santa Cabeza in Dead Rising 1 was that the government was ashamed of what happened and just wanted to forget about it, which is why Carlito used zombies for his revenge. It was his last laugh. But now Dr. Barnaby was a mad scientist that wanted to be immortal. It's such a blatant retcon, they also have to have him go to the Willamette Mall so he could watch his handiwork in person.
I've been summoned by an unknown agent, likely to my death.
The voice was familiar. Perhaps an employee or a citizen of Santa Cabeza. If so, I must go prepared. If anyone survived that incident, and if they know my name and contact information, it is likely they blame me for what happened. Additionally, the infected population grows apace. If I was a sane man, I would stay below. But I must confess to an irrational desire to witness my handiwork.
Granted, they still acknowledge Carlito and Isabella lured him there, but he fully acknowledges it was a trap, but he just wanted to see the outbreak play out with his own eyes. Even though he could have just watched from his secure compound and wouldn't have had to put his life at risk. Like, if he knows it's a trap, why walk into it? We never find out why Barnaby was at the mall in the original, just that he was lured there by Carlito. It's easy to assume he threatened to expose Barnaby or took advantage of the chaos and promised that he would be safe, some kind of lie that got him where he wanted. Also, this is a small gripe. They also have Barnaby say the outbreak started at the Willamette Mall, the original one from 2006.
September 19th, 2006. Dr. Russell Barnaby. This is likely my final progress report. There's been an outbreak in the Willamette Mall. I didn't cause it. I don't know who did it. I don't even know how it's possible.
But that's not what happened. Carlito unleashed the wasps in town and the remaining survivors went to the mall for shelter. Zombies already flooded the town and the mall was the last safe haven they had. That's why you see zombies crowding around it in the intro. If the outbreak started there, why would people run to it? Small issue, but point remains, it's dumb. Anyway, we find out that Calder is actually a guy. He's an obscure soldier that was infected and mutated by this big MacGuffin machine that Barnaby built, turning into an advanced zombie that was still sentient, now completely insane and convinced he's the next stage of evolution. So once again, the whole they didn't start the outbreak point by Vic ain't exactly true. Obscurus was trying to track down Barnaby's research for the sake of creating zombies, which is how Calder got turned into a mutant. Fucking dumbass. Still, Frank has the proof he needs. He then fights the leader of Obscurus, this woman by the name of Fontana. She reveals that they were hired by Shadow Klein to get the research and find a way to domesticate zombies. Not for an army like you would think, but just to prove it could be done. Not even Obscurus knows why, since Fontana assumes it's just for a source of cheap labor.
You're trying to finish Barnaby's research. Parlay zombieism into some kind of immortality treatment. Trying to make a mint off a bunch of aging millionaires.
That was the plan, but I guess immortality isn't as profitable as cheap labor.
What?
At first, the client just wanted to exploit Dr. Barnaby's research, but then these smart zombies started showing up and the mission changed. Pacify, domesticate, and train.
You plan to make soldiers, aren't you? You're gonna make some kind of undead army.
You out of your mind? You think anyone's gonna set these things loose with a gun? No. No, the plan was coffee farmers.
Really? Oh, well, there is a lot of money in coffee.
Or manufacturing, or meat packing, or fucking fruit, I don't know.
Peanuts. Peanuts are hard to harvest, just a thought.
Cheap, unskilled labor exported to whoever's buying.
But the why doesn't really matter. It is an extremely fucked up and stupid plan, the exact type of plans that Frank loves to smash up, so let's go do that. After the two fight, Calder finally reveals himself. Actually, he's revealed way earlier by a fucking chapter transition. Yeah, they just show Calder, despite them trying to build up to him the whole game by this point. Whatever, who cares, unfinished game. Still, Fontana dies. She tries to sacrifice herself to stop Calder, and it didn't work. And then Frank has to stop Calder from doing something. It's not clear what his whole deal is. Obviously, it's him who caused the outbreak since he's been living in the sewers building a colony of smart zombies over time, but there's no "this is my evil plan" moment. He mainly mutters about how humans suck and zombies are super cool. Maybe there is no plan. Maybe he wants to set up a Christmas party. Have a lot of decorations down there. I thought it was kind of cozy. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, Frank has to go kill Tom. Yeah, the crazy survivalist dude I mentioned earlier. Well, it turns out he's a crazy survivalist dude. He's revealed as a tyrant that's been killing his own people and tries to execute Hammond after she plans a coup against him. Frank helps kill him. Now Hammond leads the group. Alright, so that was pointless. I mean, I guess you can see Hammond as the Dead Rising girl for 4. It's sort of there, and she's leagues better than Vic because at least she isn't a hypocritical douchebag, but it doesn't matter. Back to the main plot, Frank travels down to the sewer and swipes the data from Dr. Barnaby from Calder, who seems like he wants to destroy it. Why? I have no fucking clue. Maybe he sees it as a crime against humanity, even though he hates humanity. Maybe the data has a way to cure it, even though Barnaby didn't want a cure for this exact form of zombification. Whatever. Calder wants to smash the data, but Frank wants it, so they fight. Well, it's more that Frank runs away while Calder throws barrels at him. The segment sucks. There's no proper way to push through a horde, and you're expected to just get through said horde fast while the sewer's filled with fire. And there's plenty of special zombies acting like roadblocks. It's just not fun. I hate it. Still, Frank escapes, and Vic swipes the data. Oh hey, the dipshit who couldn't get any of the main plot done coming in to say she was the real journalist? Oh wow, so great, awesome, very cool.
You're going places. Namely, the front page of the Times.
Frank, Give it to me. Just do it. Come on.
Okay.
I'm not gonna let you sell this to the highest bidder. This time we're gonna do it the right way.
Yeah, you keep telling yourself that.
Step away from the hard drive.
Calder just saying if you ripped her apart, it would be a solid. But no, that doesn't happen. Vic steals the data and runs through the whole mall, completely oblivious to the super violent, intelligent zombie chasing after her. She's been here an entire month. She embedded herself into Obscurus, and she doesn't even know Calder is a thing. Oh my god. Anyway, this all culminates in the final battle against Calder. Now, I haven't mentioned the exosuit, like, at all through the whole video, but you're expected to wear one for the final fight. So here's a quick aside to talk about it. The exosuit is kind of the big gimmick of the game. The power armor Frank can put on and absolutely shred whatever is around him. It has its own arsenal of weapons and upgrades you can use that change how it works. On paper and in practice, exosuit's okay. That's about it. It's a decent little power-up that's fun for a little while. It feels heavy and the upgrades are, at the very least, varied. There's nothing that makes me loathe putting it on, but it also wasn't anything that I was clamoring to grab first chance I could. It's just fine. And it's at least decently fitting to show up for the final boss fight. It helps make Calder feel like a powerful enemy that you need extra firepower to take down. The problem is the fight is like every other fight in the game. You do some damage, Calder fucks off while the room swarms with his goons, you kill them, then he comes back and you do some more damage to him. There's at least more showmanship to this, making a point that he leaps across the map to drain electricity to heal, but there's nothing here that feels anywhere near as cinematic as other final bosses in the series. Fighting TK at the end of Dead Rising 2, the Brock fight in Dead Rising 1, Hemlock and DR3 felt more cinematic and final compared to Calder. Calder just feels like a boss fight. The only real boss fight in the game. Still, at least he did. Yeah, he did. Vic and Frank make up for their differences and they both meet up with Brad. Frank even promising Vic that they'll split the story 50-50. She writes it up and he gets to use his pictures.
What do you want for it?
Oh, jeez.
No, I mean it. I'll give you anything.
All right. I want the story. My words, your pictures. Big coverage, big impact.
Together. 50-50.
Dude, you literally did all of the work. What the fuck? Vic solved none of this for a month straight and just got people killed in the war between Tom's group and Obscurus, which had nothing to do with Calder. Jesus Christ. Anyway, they all have to reach the helicopter as they're chased by a horde of zombies. It's a long stretch of just fighting zombies. A lot of fighting zombies. But at least you're given plenty of guns. Still, we all know the ending. It's one of the more famous parts of Dead Rising 4. The group reaches the helicopter, Frank is grabbed by the horde, and he sacrificed himself so the others could go free. And Vic writes a story talking about how Frank would have just lied about everything and made himself the hero.
If Frank could have it his way, this is where the story would end. He'd die a hero, sacrificing himself for the good of his friends. He wouldn't need to follow it up to see the mess that unfolded in the months after. But Frank's not here to tell the story his way. He can't load it up with spicy embellishments. Listening to his notes, I kind of wonder how this story would have gone when he told it later. Would he have defeated Fontana in single combat? Refused to conspire with the evil Dr. Blackburn? Added a sweet romance with the city engineer? I'm sure his second book would have sold as well as his first. But Frank's not here to tell his story, so he's got to trust me to do it, whether he wanted it that way or not. And I say, the truth is better than fiction.
Even though he actually was the hero and literally died to save your unappreciative ass. He killed Calder. He found out who Calder was. And now the whole thing was tied to Dr. Barnaby's research. What did you do, Vic? Which, by the way, is a boy's name. Is there any contribution you actually gave to the main plot that wasn't just getting in the way of Frank and trying to steal his work and pass it off as your doing? Which is literally what you did in the sewers after he got Dr. Barnaby's research? Oh my god, fuck it. Whatever. Story's over. Frank's dead. Except he's not. Yeah, the response to Dead Rising 4 was so negative among fans that Capcom Vancouver, with its last breaths, put out some DLC and a sort of Ultimate Edition that came with them all bundled. Frank's big package. You have mini golf as an extra mode. It's mini golf. It's fine, even if it's an annoying callback to the running gag that Frank really wanted to play minigolf for some reason. You also had Capcom Heroes, an extra mode for the campaign where you could dress up in various costumes based on Capcom characters to use their abilities and movesets. It is there. The big problem is that it's literally just going through the main campaign all over again with these costumes acting as just gimmick power-ups. Not worth it. But the important one is Frank Rising, the actual ending of the game. Yeah, this is basically Dead Rising 4's overtime. The DLC revolves around Frank resurrecting as a zombie. His moveset is changed to reflect this. You don't have any weapons you can pick up and use in Frank Rising. Instead, you have a basic swipe, an execute ability where you grab an enemy and bite into them once your hit counter's high enough, which is your main way of restoring health. There's a howl ability that acts like an AoE that can stun or quickly kill enemies depending on how strong they are. It also quickly builds the heat meter, so it's the best ability by far. There's a spit ability that exists. It's only helpful once it's upgraded enough, and even then, it's very specific circumstances that spit fucking sucked. It's a ranged option, but you're not meant to be fighting at range. Then you have the lunge. The lunge is just bad. Enemy detection on it is dog shit. It quickly breaks down the minute the environment has any verticality to it, and it's made worse by the fact that it's your only way of disarming enemies. So if there's an enemy who's giving you shitloads of trouble thanks to their powerful weapon, all you have is an unreliable attack that likes to fight you as your only option to deal with it. Now don't go in expecting this to be Stubbs' zombie. This isn't a fun mode where you get to control the zombie horde this go around. No, it's basically just playing a version of Frank with less options. But at the same time, that's kind of what makes it better than the main game. Don't get me wrong, I still absolutely hated Frank Rising, but you could see it had a clearer vision to it. The time limit is back, and you can finish the mode in around 2 hours or you fail. Your only tools are the powers given, so the mode revolves around upgrading these abilities in 2 ways. Either by completing WASP challenges that give you upgrades for the rest of the playthrough, or finding various collectibles that actually upgrade you permanently, so even on a new run, you'll still have the upgrades that can make the next attempt easier. There is a clearer idea of what they wanted to do in Frank Rising compared to the campaign, it's just that it's plagued by the exact same issues. The writing is still painful and lackluster. The combat is still wonky and not really that fun. And if anything, the timer ends up being a pain in the ass, mainly due to how broken things can get at times. First time through, I failed the mode because it kept dying at a specific spot over and over again. And guess why? Because the lunge wouldn't work on enemy I really needed to disarm. Plus, you're expected to fight exosuit guys unarmed, who can easily wombo combo you or pull you into grabs that eat a ton of health. On top of a recurring issue I ran into where Frank would just get stuck on stuff. Yeah, I just wouldn't be able to move for a period of time. I would eventually break out of it, but that's a little bit of time that's permanently willed away I can't get back. Which, by the way, if you die for whatever reason in Frank Rising, you don't get the time lost back. No, you permanently lose it. It's just gone. You can argue it's a source of tension that the main game needed, and my response to that is it's not very fun to realize you're losing time because Frank got stuck on a piece of the environment and won't move. Yeah, this is why I said the main game having a timer would have been a disaster. It simply was not ready for one. We should be thankful it wasn't forced in. Another aspect of Frank Rising is that multiple endings have returned. Kind of. You have the obvious fail state ending where you run out of time and can't escape the bombing, but you have a second bad ending that you get by not completing every WASP challenge, where Hammond and her group die while Frank escapes, consumed with guilt that he wasn't able to save them. This would be a neat addition if the best ending cutscene wasn't basically the exact same one, only Hammond and her group are on the helicopter with Frank. Like, not even a cutscene where Frank rushes in to save them. Nothing. But fuck it, they probably couldn't make anything else for this. Yeah, Dead Rising 4 was directly responsible for killing Capcom Vancouver. It underperformed from what Japan's side of the company wanted, and they were pissed at the climber fiasco. The writing was on the wall way before the first trailer even came out. Capcom at large was prepping to axe Vancouver throughout 4's development. This is actually why I was pretty light on explaining the story, because there's just not a lot to begin with. This simply is not a case of just a game I personally don't like. It's the scraps of a project that were quickly shuffled out the door in the desperate hope to keep a studio alive. Honestly, I can't even be mad at Capcom Vancouver. Not fully. I absolutely hate the leadership that decided to do some absolutely retarded moves in the vain hope of chasing trends, but the actual grunts were stuck with cleaning up the mess. And what would screaming at them solve? They already knew the game wasn't good, and that's painful enough. They just did what they could in a situation that was never going to end well. It's not as simple as they made a bad game, therefore they're bad developers. There was such an insane story behind this game that once you hear it, you'll never be able to look at the game the same way again. Anytime you run into a bug or see a cutscene that annoys you, fight a maniac in a super underwhelming fight, or see that ending that just feels cheap and out of nowhere, I don't hate Dead Rising 4. I pity it, which is worse. Hate at least implies that we're standing on the same level, like we're equals, that they just made choices I personally don't like. I hate Last of Us 2, because that's a game that had everything going for it and chose to be a pretentious waste of time. I hate Resident Evil 3 Remake because it's a glorified DLC pack that completely screws up what should have been an easy slam dunk. You get the idea. Dead Rising 4 at first was a game I hated. I thought it was a lazy cash grab that fell apart because they wanted to milk people, but reading into what happened made me realize how much of it wasn't by choice. They didn't remove stuff like psychopaths and the timer just to water the game down. It's because they didn't have the time to do any of it right. They were screwed over and doing what they could with as little they had. That's why I just feel bad. Not guilty for making fun of Dead Rising 4, it sucks and it's a bad game, but I feel awful for the developers who were stuck in a no-win situation. They had everything stacked against them. Of course they would fail. That's the tragedy of it all. Of course it would end up like this. There was never a way to prevent it. The stones were laid long before, and the path was always going to lead here. Maybe if Capcom Japan intervened earlier, maybe if they weren't so happy to cut names and faces out of Vancouver studio in the middle of production, maybe if the leadership weren't dumb enough to try to turn Dead Rising into a Last of Us killer. There's so much we can ponder over and lament, but this is how it is, whether we like it or not. For a while, this was the final chapter. Dead Rising died with 4. Even now, there's only been a few twitches from the corpse. You had the deluxe remaster not too long ago, but that's its own story. Let's just say it wasn't the return to form everyone wanted. Hell, only now are we getting grumblings about a possible Dead Rising 5. But that's all they are for now. Grumblings. Hopefully we'll get more news and we can get the return we've been waiting for years, but even if we do, it's not going to be as grandiose as it should be. Dead Rising 4 makes me sad, that's all I can say. This is a video that ended up completely different from how I expected. I thought we could riff on the funny bad game and have a good time, but looking into what exactly happened with DR4 is one of those things that gives you perspective on the games industry. A lot of the times when a game turns out to be shit, there's a deeper story behind why, and it's never a fun one. I recommend you guys look into it yourself. You have the What Happened episode by Matt McMuscles, which I referenced earlier. You have the Did You Know Gaming episode that covers Capcom Vancouver. Both are great at laying down the timeline of what caused Dead Rising 4 to fall apart and the eventual death of the studio. To anybody who might be listening that worked at Capcom Vancouver and got stuck working on this shit show, I feel your pain. Hopefully you landed on your feet somewhere, because hearing about what went down made me rethink a lot of things. You guys were troopers, fucking warriors stuck in a shitty situation. But we gotta wrap things up here. This video has gone on way longer than ever intended. I always say that, but I'm fucking lying. Yeah, of course this was gonna be a big video. It's Dead Rising 4. What the fuck else? But still, there's a lot to say about DR4. I can't recommend you guys check out the game. It's buggy, frustrating, and above all, just not fun. And going forward, if the franchise ever does come back, it will probably be completely ignored, which is for the best. Still, maybe one day we'll get Dead Rising 5, and it wants to be Dead Rising 5, not some other game. The whole story began because Capcom Vancouver wanted to be something it wasn't. So the only solution is to reevaluate what drew people to this series in the first place. And guess what? There's still 2 chapters to talk about. And unfortunately, the next one's not gonna be positive either. The Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster. The attempt to bring back the series, which ended up being a mixed bag, to say the least. That's for next time, which will be when I say so. You wanna know what else is because I said so? Gamer subs, use code TAL at checkout. Use the code. Use code TAL at checkout. Video is pretty long. Use the code. Use the code. Long video means long deals. Use code. Use it because I said so. Still, that's Dead Rising 4. A tragedy by every definition. One we should learn from and try our best to never repeat, which is strangely fitting for a game all about paying tribute to the first game, but it's not exactly in the way they wanted. Still, see you guys. Hey, loser. Do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're going to be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's going to look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I'm now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how you're not buying my shirt. They're gonna plant crack in your house, and they're gonna arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.
Never mind, death professor, your structure's fine. My dust is better, your victim flies so high. All to catch the birds eye full of who's next. Never you mind, death professor, if love is life, my love is better. Your victim flies so high. Eyes could be the diamond confused with who's next. Never you mind. Professor, your shots are fine, my strikes are better, your fiction flies so high, all could use a doctor, who's sick, who's next, never you mind, death professor, electrified, my love is better, it's crystallized, so mine could be the diamond fused with who's next. This is beginning to feel like the night of the loser forever. This is beginning to feel like the night of the loser forever. This is beginning to feel like the dawn of